part of making your first quilt is the cutting out of the fabric. I've got Mika here to help me demonstrate. Admittedly, this is not the most fun part, for me anyway. Power through, cut out the squares, get it done. So for this portion of the project, you're going to need your rotary mat, your plexi ruler, and your rotary cutter, as well as your fabrics, of course. So for this part, you can use just a standard ruler and a pencil to mark off your 6-inch squares. Like I've said in previous things about this, this is going to be the way I do it for the purposes of this tutorial. It makes it so much easier, but you can definitely get by with a ruler, a pencil, and a really good pair of fabric scissors to cut out your fabrics. I'm going to start by using one of my smaller fat quarters, just because it's smaller and more manageable, easier to see on this, but the process will be the same for each of the larger pieces. So I'm going to start on the longer side. You'll need to square off your fabric if you haven't done so already. Luckily with fat quarters, they're usually already kind of a square edge, or there's usually always a square edge on your selvage edge. Some people don't use selvage edges. I do. Why make it harder on yourself? To square off fabric anyway. So just make a straight edge and then take your ruler, which is conveniently 6 inches wide, place it on the edge of your fabric using your rotary cutter, slice along the edge. And we're just going to start by making these strips first, these 6-inch strips. Don't worry about cutting the blocks yet. So again, line it up, the ruler along the edge of the fabric. Slow and steady wins this race. You want to make sure you're cutting out your squares as accurately as possible, because this is really going to affect how the quilt comes together in the end. So try to be as accurate as you possibly can with cutting out the fabric. And if you have a rotary cutter and you've already had one and been using it, I highly recommend switching out the blades for a fresh blade. Cutting with a dull rotary blade will produce undesirable results. And I'm doing it this way to make it easier to show you, but really the best way to use your rotary cutter is to cut toward you. So the best way to do it is to line up the ruler along the left edge. That one's not square, so I'll have to square that off later. Line your ruler up along the left edge and then cut. That way you can apply pressure with your hand, your dominant hand, onto the ruler to keep it steady. And I can already see that this one was not squared off because it wasn't straight along the edge, so I'm going to go ahead and square that off now. And I know it seems silly, but this tiny little amount of fabric, this will definitely affect how your quilt comes together. So make sure, like I said, you're cutting these pieces as accurately as you can. And I'm just going to continue along cutting my fabric. Okay, now I'm going to show you this on a slightly larger piece of fabric just so you can kind of see what we're working with here. As you can see, I've lined it up with my selvage edge. This is not squared off, so I'm going to take my ruler here, line it up against the edge I know is straight, and then cut off this excess to make it flush with the edge of selvage edge. And I also know too that selvage edges aren't guaranteed to be straight. Just square it off as best as you can. Like I said, cutting out is honestly not my forte. It's the part I like the least. I try to just do it as neatly and cleanly as possible. And I have my fabric folded because the idea is that I'm going to cut 2 rows at one time to make this process a little bit speedier. All Now we have it squared off. Flip mine over, the fold in the middle, line up along the edge, accurately as possible. And now we have 2 strips. So yes, save some time, but if you fold it in half, you can cut 2 strips at the same time. And then once we have all of the 6-inch strips cut out, we're going to cut the blocks. Before I start cutting the strips, I like to line up the strip along one of the grids on my rotary mat, and then squaring off that edge by just lining up the ruler, again perpendicular to the strip on the mat, taking your rotary cutter, and then just slicing along the edge there and removing this kind of extra bit at the top and bottom of the fabric that can be uneven. And then from there, let's flip this around, and then I can start cutting. So 1 strip at a time, we're going to take our 6-inch strips, and then we're going to cut them into 6-inch blocks. So again, this ruler is 6 inches wide, so you just have to line it up along the edge and slice. There's this block. And then this leftover amount, just discard into a scraps pile. Sometimes your squares will still not be perfect at this point, so what you can do is kind of line this up along into the corner and then make more precise cuts. So for example, you see there's like a little bit, actually I don't know if you can, but there is a little bit of an extra edge right here. So just take up the corner, line it up within the corner, and cut out the parts, hi Jafar, that are not lining up, so you can make it as precisely 6 inches as possible. Yeah? Now that we have all of the squares cut out, finally, it's a good idea to give each square a good press with your iron, and then we can move on to piecing it together.